Marcus wiped his sweaty palms on his worn jeans as he stood outside the gates of Whitmore Academy. The tall iron bars looked like prison walls to him. Behind them sat a massive brick building with white columns and perfectly cut grass. Everything looked clean and expensive. Everything looked nothing like the group home where he lived. The social worker, Mrs. Chun, walked beside him carrying a small bag with his few belongings. She had told him this was a special chance. The academy wanted to try something new. They would let one foster kid attend their school for free. Marcus was that kid. "Remember what we talked about," Mrs. Chun said softly. "This is a big opportunity. These kids come from rich families. Their parents are doctors and lawyers and business owners. Just be yourself and work hard." Marcus nodded, but his stomach felt sick. He had been in foster care since he was 6 years old. Now he was 16 and had lived in 12 different homes. He learned not to get too comfortable anywhere. People always sent him away. The main office smelled like flowers and fresh paint. A woman with perfect blonde hair and a bright smile greeted them. Her name tag said, "Mrs. Blackwood, Student Services." Her smile seemed fake to Marcus, like the plastic fruit in one of his old foster homes. "You must be Marcus," she said in a voice that was too sweet. "Welcome to Whitmore Academy." "We're so excited to have you here," Marcus mumbled a quiet thank you. Mrs. Chun squeezed his shoulder and told him she would check on him next week. Then she was gone and Marcus was alone. With Mrs. Blackwood, the tour of the school made Marcus feel smaller with each step. The classrooms had smart boards and computers for every student. The library was bigger than his entire group home. The cafeteria looked like a fancy restaurant. Other students walked by in expensive clothes and designer backpacks. They looked at Marcus like he was a bug that had crawled inside their perfect world. "And this," Mrs. Blackwood said as they entered a large room filled with musical instruments, "is our music room. Do you play anything, Marcus?" Marcus's eyes went straight to the grand piano in the corner. It was black and shiny, bigger than any piano he had ever seen. "I play piano," he said quietly. Mrs. Blackwood raised her eyebrows. "Really? How wonderful. We have a very competitive music program here. Many of our students have been playing since they were 3 or 4 years old. They have private teachers and perform at Carnegie Hall." Marcus felt his cheeks burn. He had learned to play on an old keyboard at one of his foster homes. The family had gotten tired of him and given him away, but he never forgot what they taught him. He practiced on tables and desks, moving his fingers like he was playing real keys. Music was the only thing that made him feel better when the world got too hard. "I'm not that good," Marcus said. "I just like to play." "Well, perhaps you can join our beginners class," Mrs. Blackwood said with that fake smile again. The rest of the day went by in a blur. Teachers introduced him to classes where everyone already knew each other. Kids whispered and pointed when they thought he wasn't looking. At lunch, Marcus sat alone at a table in the corner, eating a sandwich from the free lunch program while other kids ate sushi and salads their parents had packed. After school, Marcus found himself back in the music room. It was empty and quiet. He walked slowly to the grand piano and sat on the bench. The keys were perfect and white, not yellow and chipped like the ones he was used to. He placed his fingers on them but didn't press down. He was afraid someone would yell at him. "What are you doing?" Marcus jumped and turned around. 3 boys stood in the doorway. They were all tall and wore expensive uniforms. The one in front had blonde hair and cold blue eyes. Marcus had seen him in chemistry class. His name was Brandon, and his father owned half the city. "Nothing," Marcus said, standing up quickly. "I was just looking." Brandon walked into the room, with his friends following behind him. "You're the charity case, right? The foster kid they let in for free?" Marcus's face burned, but he didn't answer. He had heard worse things before. "I heard you told Mrs. Blackwood you play piano," Brandon continued. "That's funny. My family has owned 3 different grand pianos. I've been playing since I was 4. I doubt you've ever even touched a real piano before." "I have," Marcus said. Quietly, but his voice shook. Brandon laughed. "Prove it. Play something." Marcus looked at the piano and then back at Brandon. He knew this was a trap, but he couldn't help himself. Music was the one thing he was good at. The one thing that was really his. He sat back down at the piano and placed his fingers on the keys. He closed his eyes and started to play a song he had learned years ago. It was a sad, beautiful melody that always made him think of his mother. He couldn't remember her face, but he remembered her humming this song when he was very small. The music filled the room. Marcus forgot about Brandon and his friends. He forgot about being the foster kid and wearing old clothes. He forgot about everything except the music flowing from his fingers. When he finished, the room was silent. Marcus opened his eyes and saw that Brandon's face had changed. He looked surprised and maybe even a little angry. "Lucky guess," Brandon said finally. "Anyone can play one song. But playing piano is about more than that. It's about training and discipline and having the right background. Things you don't have." Marcus stood up from the piano bench. "Music doesn't care where you come from." Brandon's eyes got cold again. "We'll see about that," he said. Then he turned and left with his friends. Marcus stayed in the music room until the janitor came to lock up. He walked back to the group home as the sun was setting. The other kids there were watching TV and doing homework. Marcus went to his small room and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the grand piano and how good it felt to play real keys again. He thought about Brandon's mean words and cold stare. Most of all, he thought about what Brandon had said. "We'll see about that." Marcus had a feeling that Brandon was planning something. He had seen that look before in other kids who didn't like him. It was the look of someone who wanted to hurt him and make him feel small, but Marcus had survived 10 years in foster care. He had lived through families who didn't want him in schools where he didn't fit in. He was stronger than Brandon knew. And he had something Brandon would never understand. He had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Marcus walked through the gates of Whitmore Academy again. This time, he held his head a little higher. He didn't know what Brandon was planning, but he was ready for whatever came next. The music was still in his fingers, and that was enough. The next few weeks at Whitmore Academy were harder than Marcus had expected. Brandon and his friends made sure of that. They would bump into him in the hallways and act like it was an accident. They would laugh loudly when he walked by, making jokes about his old shoes and cheap clothes. In chemistry class, Brandon would ask questions that were meant to make Marcus look stupid. "Hey, Marcus," Brandon said one day during lunch. "My dad is thinking about donating a new piano to the school. He wants to know if you think the charity kids would appreciate it, or if they're too busy stealing things to notice music." The other kids at nearby tables turned to watch. Some of them laughed. Marcus kept eating his sandwich and didn't say anything. He had learned that fighting back only made things worse, but Brandon wasn't done. "I heard you've been sneaking into the music room after school, Mrs. Patterson. The music teacher told my mom you've been playing the piano when no one's around." "That's kind of weird, don't you think, playing alone like that?" Marcus looked up at Brandon. "I'm not hurting anything." "Maybe not," Brandon said with a cold smile. "But using school equipment when you're not supposed to? That sounds like stealing to me." Marcus felt his heart start to beat faster. "I'm not stealing anything." "We'll see," Brandon said. That phrase again. The same thing he had said in the music room that first day. After lunch, Marcus tried to focus on his classes, but Brandon's words kept playing in his head. Was he really not supposed to use the piano? Mrs. Blackwood had shown him the music room on his first day. She never said he couldn't go there. That afternoon, Marcus went to find Mrs. Patterson, the music teacher. She was a small woman with gray hair who always wore colorful scarves. She seemed nicer than most of the other teachers, but Marcus was still nervous about talking to her. "Excuse me, Mrs. Patterson?" Marcus said quietly as she packed up her things. She looked up and smiled. "Marcus, right? How are you settling in?" "I'm okay," Marcus said. "I wanted to ask about the piano. Am I allowed to practice on it after school?" Mrs. Patterson's smile got bigger. "Of course you are. The music room is open to all students until 6 o'clock. I've heard you playing, actually." "You're very talented?" Marcus felt relief wash over him. "Thank you. I just wanted to make sure." "Have you thought about entering the spring music competition?" Mrs. Patterson asked. It's next month. Students perform solo pieces, and the winner gets a scholarship to music camp this summer. Marcus had seen the posters around school, but never thought about entering. I don't think I'm good enough for something like that. I think you'd be surprised, Mrs. Patterson said. The competition is open to all skill levels. You should consider it. That night at the group home, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the competition. A music camp sounded like heaven to him. A whole summer of just playing piano and learning from real teachers. But he also knew that Brandon would probably enter too. Brandon and all his rich friends with their expensive lessons and perfect technique. The next day at school, Marcus saw a crowd of students gathered around the music room bulletin board. He walked over to see what they were looking at. Someone had posted the official rules for the spring music competition. Are you going to enter, Marcus? Marcus turned around and saw a girl from his English class. Her name was Sarah, and she was one of the few students who had been nice to him. She played violin and sometimes nodded at him in the hallways. I don't know, Marcus said. Maybe you should, Sarah said. I heard you playing yesterday. You're really good. Brandon appeared beside them like he had been waiting for this moment. What's this about the competition? Is the foster kid actually thinking about entering? His name is Marcus, Sarah said firmly. And yes, he should enter. He's talented, Brandon laughed. Talented? Playing piano isn't just about talent? It's about training and discipline and having the right foundation. You can't just show up and expect to compete with people who have been studying music their whole lives. Music is about feeling, Marcus said quietly. Not just about how much money your parents have. Brandon's face got red. Is that what you think? That this is about money? This is about skill, Marcus. This is about years of hard work and dedication. Things you wouldn't understand. More students had gathered around to watch. Marcus felt all their eyes on him. Some looked curious, others looked like they were waiting for a fight. Fine, Brandon said suddenly. Let's settle this. You want to enter the competition? Do it. But let's make it interesting. Whoever loses has to admit in front of the whole school that they don't belong here. The crowd got quiet. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. Don't, she whispered. He's trying to trick you. But Marcus looked at Brandon's cold blue eyes and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Anger, not the sad, tired anger he usually carried around. This was clean and sharp and strong. Okay, Marcus said. I'll enter. Brandon smiled like he had just won something. Great, this should be fun to watch. The crowd slowly broke up, but Marcus could feel people staring at him for the rest of the day. Word spread fast in a small school. By the time he got to his last class, everyone knew about the challenge. Mrs. Chun, his social worker, came to visit that evening. She always showed up when she sensed he was having problems. How are things going at the academy? She asked as they sat in the group home's small living room. Marcus thought about lying, but Mrs. Chun had a way of seeing through him. It's hard, he said. The other kids don't like me. All of them? Most of them. There's this one kid, Brandon. He's trying to make me look stupid. Double quotes. Mrs. Chun nodded. Rich kids can be cruel. They're not used to people who are different from them. Are you thinking about leaving? Marcus had thought about it. It would be easy to go back to his old school, where everyone was poor and no one cared about grand pianos or music competitions. But something stopped him. No, he said. I want to stay. Why? Marcus thought about the grand piano and how good it felt to play real keys. He thought about Mrs. Patterson's kind smile and Sarah sticking up for him. Most of all, he thought about the music inside him that needed to come out. Because I belong there as much as anyone else, he said. Mrs. Chun smiled. Good. Don't let them make you feel small, Marcus. You're just as good as any of those kids. After she left, Marcus went to his room and pulled out a piece of paper. He started writing down songs he knew how to play. Some he had learned from his old foster family. Others he had taught himself by listening to music on the radio. A few he had made up completely. For the competition, he needed to pick one song that would show everyone what he could do. It had to be perfect. It had to be something that came from his heart, Not from expensive lessons or fancy music books. He thought about his life, all the homes he had lived in, all the families who had given him away, all the nights he had cried himself to sleep. But he also thought about the good things, the music that had saved him, the feeling of his fingers on piano keys, the way a beautiful song could make everything else disappear. By the time he went to sleep, Marcus knew what song he would play. It was risky and maybe a little crazy, but it was truly his. Brandon and his friends could have their perfect technique and expensive training. Marcus had something they would never understand, a heart that had been broken and put back together. By music, the competition was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to get ready for the most important performance of his life. 3 weeks to prove that he belonged at Whitmore Academy, no matter where he came from or how much money he didn't have. Marcus fell asleep that night with music playing in his head. For the first time since he had arrived at the academy, he wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Marcus spent every free moment in the music room over the next 3 weeks. He would arrive early before school started and stay until the janitor locked up at night. His fingers grew stronger and more sure on the keys. The song he had chosen was getting better every day. But Brandon wasn't sitting still either. Marcus could hear him practicing in the music room during lunch. Brandon played classical pieces that sounded perfect and complicated. His fingers moved like machines across the keys, hitting every note exactly right. Other students would gather to listen and clap when he finished. "He's really good," Sarah said one day as they listened to Brandon play a piece by Mozart. "Are you sure about this competition?" Marcus nodded, but inside he felt scared. Brandon made it look so easy. Every note was clean and precise. Marcus's playing was different, more emotional, but less perfect. What if the judges only cared about technical skill? "I heard my parents talking," Sarah said quietly. "Brandon's father is friends with 2 of the judges, and Mrs. Blackwood is the 3rd judge." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Mrs. Blackwood, the woman with the fake smile who had given him the tour on his first day. She had never liked him. He could see it in her eyes every time they passed in the hallways. "That's not fair," Marcus said. "I know," Sarah said, "but you can't give up. Your playing means something." "Brandon's playing is pretty, but it doesn't have any soul." 2 days before the competition, something strange happened. Marcus went to the music room after school like always, but when he sat down at the grand piano, something was wrong. The keys felt different under his fingers. Some of them were too easy to press down, and others were too hard. When he played his song, it sounded terrible. Marcus stopped and looked closer at the piano. At first glance, it looked normal. But when he pressed the keys one at a time, he could tell that something was very wrong. Some keys made the right sounds, but others made no sound at all. A few made sounds that were too high or too low. "Is there a problem?" Marcus turned around and saw Mrs. Patterson standing in the doorway. She looked concerned. "I think something's wrong with the piano," Marcus said. "It doesn't sound right." Mrs. Patterson walked over and played a few scales. Her face got serious. "You're right. Something has happened to this piano. The internal mechanisms have been tampered with." "Tampered with?" "Someone has been inside this piano and moved things around. Strings have been loosened. Hammers have been shifted. This is sabotage." Marcus felt cold all over. "Who would do something like that?" Mrs. Patterson's face was grim. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. This is a very expensive instrument, and whoever did this could have caused permanent damage." She made some phone calls, and within an hour, a piano technician arrived at the school. He spent 2 hours looking inside the grand piano, tightening strings and adjusting hammers. When he was done, he shook his head. "I've fixed what I can," he told Mrs. Patterson. "But this piano won't be ready for any performances for at least a week. It needs time to settle and hold its tuning." Marcus's heart sank. The competition was tomorrow night. "Don't worry," Mrs. Patterson said after the technician left. "We have other pianos in the school. There's an upright piano in the choir room that you can use." But when they went to check on the upright piano, they found that it had been damaged too. Someone had poured water inside it, and the keys were swollen and wouldn't play properly. "This is unbelievable," Mrs. Patterson said. She was angry now. Someone is deliberately trying to sabotage this competition. Marcus knew who it was, but he couldn't prove it. Brandon and his friends had been planning this all along. They weren't content to just beat him fairly. They wanted to make sure he couldn't compete at all. "What am I going to do?" Marcus asked. "I can't play without a piano." Mrs. Patterson thought for a moment. "There's one more piano in the school. It's old and not in great condition, but it might work." She led Marcus down to the basement of the school, through hallways he had never seen before. In a storage room, filled with old desks and broken chairs, there was an ancient upright piano. It was brown instead of black, and the wood was scratched and faded. Several of the keys were chipped, and it looked like it hadn't been tuned in years. Marcus sat down and played a few notes. The sound was thin and tinny compared to the grand piano, but at least it worked. Most of the keys made the right sounds, though a few were slightly off pitch. "It's not much," Mrs. Patterson said, "but it's all we have." Marcus practiced on the old piano until late that night. It was hard to get used to the different feel of the keys and the weak sound it made. His beautiful song didn't sound nearly as good on this instrument, but it was better than nothing. The next day, the day of the competition, Marcus could barely focus on his classes. Other students kept looking at him and whispering. Word had gotten around that someone had sabotaged the pianos, and everyone seemed to know it was aimed at Marcus. Brandon acted completely normal, as if nothing had happened. He smiled and joked with his friends. During lunch, he even came over to Marcus's table. "I heard about the piano problems," Brandon said with fake concern. "That's really too bad. I hope you can still find a way to compete tonight." Marcus looked up at him. "I'll be there." "Good," Brandon said. "I'd hate for people to think you backed out because you were scared." That evening, the school auditorium was packed. Parents and students filled every seat. Marcus had never seen so many people in one place. He sat in the back row, wearing the only nice clothes he owned, a white shirt and black pants that Mrs. Chun had bought him for. Mrs. Patterson had arranged for the old piano to be moved onto the stage. It looked tiny and sad compared to the beautiful grand piano that was supposed to be there. Marcus could hear people in the audience whispering about it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Blackwood said into the microphone, "welcome to Whitmore Academy's annual spring music competition. Unfortunately, we've had some technical difficulties with our main piano, so we'll be using an alternate instrument tonight." She didn't mention the sabotage, but Marcus could see from her expression that she knew what had really happened. There were 8 students competing. Brandon was scheduled to perform 6th. Marcus was last. The first 5 students played well. They performed classical pieces and modern songs with skill and confidence. The audience clapped politely after each performance. But Marcus could tell that most people weren't really moved by the music. It was technically good but emotionally empty. Then it was Brandon's turn. He walked onto the stage in an expensive black suit, looking confident and relaxed. He had chosen to play a difficult piece by Chopin that required incredible finger speed and precision. Brandon's performance was flawless. His fingers flew across the keys without missing a single note. The melody was complex and beautiful, and he played it perfectly. When he finished, the audience gave him a standing ovation. Even Marcus had to admit that it was impressive. "Thank you, Brandon," Mrs. Blackwood said with a genuine smile. "That was extraordinary." Marcus felt his confidence crumble. How could he possibly follow that performance? His song was simple compared to what Brandon had just played. And he would be playing it on an old, broken-down piano that sounded like a toy compared to the grand piano Brandon had used. "Our final performer tonight is Marcus Williams," Mrs. Blackwood announced. Her voice was neutral, but Marcus could hear the doubt in it. Marcus walked onto the stage, and the auditorium suddenly felt enormous. Hundreds of eyes were watching him. He could see Brandon sitting in the front row with his arms crossed and a satisfied smile on his face. Marcus sat down at the old piano and adjusted the bench. The keys felt familiar now after practicing on them all day. He placed his hands in position and took a deep breath. Then he looked out at the audience and saw something that gave him strength. Sarah was sitting near the middle, giving him an encouraging smile. Mrs. Patterson was standing by the wall, nodding at him. Even some of the other students looked curious rather than mean. Marcus closed his eyes and began to play. The song Marcus chose was not like anything the other students had played. It wasn't a famous classical piece or a popular modern song. It was something he had created himself, born from all the pain and hope he had carried through his 16 years of life. He started slowly, with simple notes that sounded like a lullaby. This was the melody he remembered from his early childhood, the song his mother had hummed before everything went wrong. His fingers moved gently across the old keys, and despite the piano's limitations, the music filled the auditorium with something warm and familiar. As Marcus played, he forgot about the audience. He forgot about Brandon's perfect performance and Mrs. Blackwood's cold stare. He forgot about the competition entirely. The music took him back to every moment in his life when piano had saved him from despair. The melody grew stronger, more complex. Marcus added layers of harmony that represented different foster homes, different families, different heartbreaks. Some sections were angry and harsh, reflecting the nights he had cried himself to sleep. Other parts were hopeful and light, showing the moments when music had lifted him up and made him believe in himself again. The old piano responded to his touch in ways the grand piano never had. Its imperfections became part of the story. When certain keys played slightly out of tune, it sounded like the weariness Marcus felt after years of being unwanted. When the soft pedal stuck, creating muffled sounds, it was like the loneliness that lived deep in his chest. Marcus opened his eyes and saw that something had changed in the auditorium. People were leaning forward in their seats. Some had tears in their eyes. The whispering had stopped completely. Even Brandon looked surprised, his confident smile replaced by something Marcus couldn't read. The song built to a climax that represented all the anger Marcus had ever felt about being different, about being poor, about being the kid no one wanted. His hands moved across the keys with power and emotion, making the old piano sing with pain and fury. The music filled every corner of the auditorium, and Marcus felt like he was pouring his entire soul out through his fingertips. Then, as quickly as the storm had come, it passed. The final section of the song was quiet and peaceful. It was Marcus accepting who he was and finding strength in his struggles. The melody returned to the simple lullaby from the beginning, but now it was deeper, richer, filled with everything he had learned and survived. When the last note faded away, the auditorium was completely silent. Marcus sat at the piano, breathing hard, feeling empty and full at the same time. He had given everything he had to that performance. Then the applause started. It began with one person, then two, then suddenly the entire audience was on their feet, clapping and cheering. The sound was overwhelming. Marcus had never heard anything like it. He stood up from the piano bench and looked out at the crowd. People were wiping their eyes. Mrs. Patterson was crying openly. Even some of Brandon's friends looked moved by what they had heard, but Marcus's eyes found Mrs. Blackwood standing at the side of the stage. Her expression was complicated, surprised, impressed, but also uncomfortable. She looked like someone who had been forced to acknowledge something she didn't want to admit. "Thank you, Marcus," she said into the microphone when the applause finally died down. "That was very interesting." The three judges huddled together for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes. Marcus sat in the back of the auditorium, still feeling shaky from his performance. Sarah came over and sat beside him. "That was incredible," she whispered. "I've never heard anything like it." Other students approached him too, kids who had ignored him for weeks. They told him his performance was amazing, that they had never thought piano could sound like that. Even some of the parents stopped to shake his hand and compliment his playing, but Marcus noticed that Brandon and his closest friends stayed away. They sat together in a tight group, talking quietly and looking angry. Finally, Mrs. Blackwood returned to the microphone with a piece of paper in her hand. "The judges have made their decision," she announced. This was an extremely difficult choice. All of our performers showed great skill and dedication. Marcus felt his heart pounding. He told himself that winning didn't matter, that just performing had been enough. But he knew that wasn't true. He wanted to win. He needed to win. Not just for himself, but to prove that Brandon was wrong about him. Third place goes to Jennifer Walsh for her beautiful performance of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Jennifer, a junior who had played a delicate classical piece, walked onto the stage to accept her certificate. The audience clapped politely. Second place goes to Brandon Whitmore for his technically excellent performance of Chopin's Minute Waltz. Marcus's heart sank. If Brandon got second place, that meant ... Brandon walked onto the stage, but Marcus could see the shock and anger on his face. He had expected to win easily. Getting second place, especially to Marcus, was a humiliation he hadn't prepared for. Mrs. Blackwood's voice was strained as she made the final announcement. First place and winner of this year's scholarship to the Berkshire Music Camp goes to Marcus Williams for his original composition. The auditorium exploded in applause again. Marcus felt like he was in a dream as he walked onto the stage. Mrs. Blackwood handed him a trophy and a certificate, her smile looking more forced than ever. "Congratulations," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "I hope you're proud of yourself." The way she said it didn't sound like a compliment. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself surrounded by people wanting to talk to him. Parents asked about his musical training. Students wanted to know how he had learned to play like that. Mrs. Patterson beamed with pride and told everyone who would listen that she had always known Marcus was special, but through the crowd, Marcus saw Brandon leaving the auditorium with his family. His father, a tall man in an expensive suit, looked furious. He was talking angrily to Mrs. Blackwood while Brandon stood beside them, his face red with embarrassment. "Don't let them ruin this for you," Sarah said, following Marcus's gaze. "You won fair and square." Marcus nodded, but he could see that this wasn't over. Brandon and his family were used to getting what they wanted. Losing to a foster kid wasn't something they would accept quietly. Later that night, back at the group home, Marcus sat in his small room holding his trophy. The other kids had been excited to hear about his win, and even the house parents had congratulated him. Mrs. Chun had called and promised to take him out for a celebration dinner on the weekend, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was coming. He had won the competition, but he had also made enemies of some very powerful people. Brandon's father owned businesses all over the city. Mrs. Blackwood obviously had connections at the school. What would they do now that Marcus had embarrassed them in front of everyone? The next Monday at school, Marcus got his answer. He was called to the principal's office during second period. Principal Hartwell, a stern man Marcus had only seen from a distance, sat behind his desk with a serious expression. "Marcus, please sit down," he said. "We need to talk." Marcus sat in the chair across from the desk, his stomach churning. "Principal." Hartwell shuffled through some papers before looking up. "There have been some concerns raised about your performance in the music competition," he said carefully. "Specifically, questions about whether your piece was entirely original." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Blackwood has done some research, and she believes that portions of your composition may have been borrowed from other sources. Classical pieces, popular songs, folk melodies. The concern is that you may have committed plagiarism." "That's not true," Marcus said quickly. "I wrote that song myself. It came from my own experiences." Principal Hartwell nodded sympathetically, but Marcus could see that his mind was already made up. "I'm sure you believe that, Marcus. But sometimes when we hear music, we unconsciously absorb melodies that we later think we created ourselves. It's actually quite common. Can I prove that I wrote it?" Marcus asked desperately. "Unfortunately, that's very difficult to do with musical compositions," Principal Hartwell said. "Unless you have video footage of yourself composing the piece, or detailed written records of your creative process, there's no way to definitively prove originality." Marcus realized he was trapped. Of course he didn't have video footage or written records. He had created the song in his head over years of living and surviving. How could anyone prove something like that? What happens now? Marcus asked quietly. We're going to have to disqualify you from the competition, Principal Hartwell said. Your trophy and scholarship will be awarded to the rightful winner, Brandon Whitmore. Marcus felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Everything he had worked for, everything he had proven, was being taken away because of lies and politics and the fact that rich people didn't want to lose to a foster kid. This isn't fair, Marcus said, standing up. You know this isn't fair. Principal Hartwell's expression softened slightly. Life isn't always fair, Marcus, but rules are rules, I'm sorry. Marcus walked out of the principal's office in a daze. The hallways of Whitmore Academy suddenly felt cold and hostile again. Students stared at him as he passed, and he knew the news was already spreading. Balo. The news spread through Whitmore Academy like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew that Daniel Williams, the foster kid who had won the music competition, was being called a cheater. Students whispered in the hallways. Teachers looked at him with disappointment. Even the janitor seemed to avoid making eye contact. Daniel walked through the school in a fog of anger and sadness. He had been so happy after his performance, so proud of what he had accomplished. Now it all felt like a cruel joke. He thought about calling Mrs. Chun, his social worker, but what could she do? The school had made up their minds. During lunch, Daniel sat alone at his usual table in the corner. Most students stayed away from him now, probably afraid they would get in trouble for talking to a cheater. But then someone sat down across from him. It was Lisa, the girl from his English class who played violin. This is garbage, she said quietly, looking around to make sure no one was listening. Everyone knows you didn't cheat. That song came from your heart. I could hear it. Daniel looked up at her, surprised. You believe me? Of course I believe you, Lisa said. I've been playing music for 10 years. I know the difference between something real and something copied. What you played was real. Then why won't anyone else believe me? Lisa glanced over at Brandon's table, where he was sitting with his friends, looking smug and satisfied. Because some people have more power than others in this place. Brandon's family donates a lot of money to this school. His father sits on the board of directors. When people like that want something to happen, it usually happens. Daniel felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. So there's nothing I can do? I didn't say that, Lisa said with a small smile. But you're going to need help. And you're going to need proof. That afternoon, Daniel went to see Mrs. Patterson in the music room. She was sitting at her desk looking tired and upset. When she saw Daniel, her face lit up with a sad smile. How are you holding up? She asked. Not good, Daniel admitted. Mrs. Patterson, you know I didn't cheat, right? That song was mine, Mrs. Patterson nodded firmly. I absolutely know that. I've been teaching music for 25 years, and I've never heard anything like what you played. That wasn't copied from somewhere else. That was pure creativity. Then why won't anyone listen? Mrs. Patterson sighed. Because sometimes the truth isn't enough. Sometimes you need evidence, and unfortunately, proving that a song is original is very difficult. Daniel felt tears building up in his eyes. So, I just have to accept this? Let them call me a cheater and give my prize to Brandon? Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Daniel with a determined expression. Maybe not. I have an idea, but it's going to require some courage from you. What kind of idea? Well, Mrs. Patterson said slowly, if your song really is original, then you should be able to explain how you created it. You should be able to tell the story behind each part of the music. Most importantly, you should be able to play variations of it, to show that you understand every note and why it's there. Daniel thought about this. You mean like prove I wrote it by showing I really understand it? Exactly. A person who just copied a song from somewhere else wouldn't be able to do that. But someone who created the music from their own experiences would know every detail. But who would listen to me? Principal Hartwell already made his decision. Mrs. Patterson smiled. Leave that to me. I have some connections, too. The next day, Mrs. Patterson made a phone call that changed everything. She called Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a famous music professor from the State University. Dr. Martinez had been Mrs. Patterson's teacher years ago, and she owed her a favor. "I need you to come listen to a student," Mrs. Patterson explained over the phone. "There's been an accusation of plagiarism, but I believe it's false. This boy has real talent, and he's being railroaded by politics. Dr. Martinez agreed to come to the school that Friday. She would listen to Daniel play and interview him about his composition. Her opinion would carry weight that even Principal Hartwell couldn't ignore. When Daniel heard about this, he felt hope for the first time in days, but he also felt terrified. What if he couldn't explain his music well enough? What if Dr. Martinez didn't believe him either? Lisa found him in the music room that evening, practicing for his meeting with Dr. Martinez. "You're overthinking this," she said, sitting down beside the old piano. "Just tell her the truth about your life and how it connects to your music. That's all you can do. What if the truth isn't good enough?" "Then at least you'll know you tried," Lisa said. "But I think it will be. Your story is powerful, Daniel. Don't be afraid to share it." Meanwhile, Brandon was not sitting still. He had heard about Dr. Martinez coming to the school, and he was worried. His father had already ordered a new trophy with Brandon's name on it, and the family had started making plans for his summer at music camp. "We can't let this foster kid embarrass us again," Brandon told his friends. "My father says if I lose this scholarship to him, it will make our whole family look weak. What are you going to do?" asked Tyler, one of Brandon's closest friends. Brandon smiled coldly. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person Daniel really is." That Thursday, the day before Dr. Martinez was supposed to visit, Brandon put his plan into action. He had spent the week digging into Daniel's background, using his father's connections to get information about the boy's past. During lunch, Brandon stood up and walked to the center of the cafeteria. "Excuse me, everyone," he said loudly. "I think you all should know something about our so-called musical genius." The cafeteria got quiet. Daniel felt his stomach drop as all eyes turned to Brandon. "Did you all know that Daniel Williams has been arrested 3 times?" Brandon announced. "Shoplifting, vandalism, and assault. This is the kind of person we're defending." Gasps echoed around the cafeteria. Students turned to stare at Daniel, their expressions changing from sympathy to suspicion and fear. Daniel felt his face burn with shame. It was true, he had been arrested 3 times. But Brandon wasn't telling the whole story. The shoplifting charge was for stealing food when he was 12, and his foster family wasn't feeding him properly. The vandalism was for writing his name on a wall at a group home. The assault charge came from defending himself when older kids tried to beat him up. "Those charges were dropped," Daniel said, standing up. His voice shook, but he tried to sound strong. "And they happened when I was younger. I was just trying to survive." "Once a criminal, always a criminal," Brandon said with a shrug. "And now he's a cheater too. Maybe it's time we all stopped feeling sorry for him and started protecting ourselves." The damage was done. Daniel could see it in the faces around him. Even some of the students who had been friendly to him now looked uncertain and afraid. The trust he had worked so hard to build was crumbling in real time. Lisa stood up at her table. "That's not fair, Brandon." "Those charges were from years ago, and they were all about survival. You've never had to worry about having enough food or a safe place to sleep." "Stay out of this, Lisa," Brandon warned. "Unless you want people to start wondering about your judgment, too." Daniel saw Lisa hesitate, and he couldn't blame her. Standing up for him now would cost her socially, maybe even academically. He couldn't ask her to sacrifice her own future for his. "It's okay," Daniel said quietly to Lisa. Then he looked around the cafeteria at all the faces staring at him. "You can believe whatever you want about me, but my music is real. And tomorrow, when Dr. Martinez comes, I'm going to prove it." He picked up his lunch tray and walked out of the cafeteria, his head held high even though his heart was breaking. Behind him, he could hear the buzz of conversation starting up again. Everyone talking about what Brandon had revealed. That night at the group home, Daniel lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be the most important day of his life. Dr. Martinez would decide whether he was a talented musician being treated unfairly or just another troubled kid trying to con his way into something he didn't deserve. Daniel thought about all the foster homes he had lived in, all the times he had been rejected and sent away. He thought about the night he had written his song, pouring all his pain and hope into the melody. Most of all, he thought about what Mrs. Patterson had said. Sometimes the truth isn't enough, but it's all you have. He closed his eyes and began to play his song in his mind, preparing for the performance of his lifetime. Tomorrow he would either prove that music could overcome prejudice in politics, or he would learn that some battles couldn't be won. No matter how hard you fought, either way, Daniel knew he had to try. The music inside him demanded nothing less.